Hi ladies and gentlemen, this is video number 4 about where do industries locate. You should take a moment to set up your notes. These are the 3 main topics that we are going to cover. So the first thing we're going to discuss is site factors. So where do industries locate when they think about specific site factors? And what I mean by that is site factors are industrial location factors that are related to the costs of the factors of production inside a plant. Okay, so these are things that would impact what it would cost to make a product inside of the plant. And the 3 site factors are labor, capital, and land. So I'm going to talk about labor first. So this is usually the most important site factor. Minimizing labor costs is important to many industries, and the variation of labor costs around the world is huge. So if you look at this chart here, you can see in the developed world, the average wage paid to a manufacturing worker is around $30 to $45. However, if you look at developing countries or these newly industrializing countries, places like China and India, it's actually less than $2 per hour to pay a manufacturing worker. So that has huge repercussions for where industries are located. Here's another way to think about it. If you look at this, how much it costs to make a hoodie that is sold in the United States. Okay, so figure A is in the United States and figure B is in Asia. And as you can see, costs are very similar in spinning and weaving, trimming, and shipping, right? However, you can see that there is a duty or an import tax on that Asian hoodie, but this gigantic portion of the cost of the hoodie in the United States is spent on labor. So the total cost of the US hoodie, even though they don't have to pay this import tax, is significantly higher than the cost of what it would take to produce a hoodie in Asia and then sell it in the US. And you can see here through this visualization that it's the labor that makes the huge difference. So this results in places like China having 1/4 of the world's industrial production, and India has 1/5. Okay, the second site factor is capital. This is funds or money that is typically borrowed from a financial institution. And so we're going to talk about Silicon Valley here in California as a case study for capital. So banks have been willing to provide loans for new software and communication firms in this specific region of California, Silicon Valley, even though other lenders may have hesitated in other places of the world. This is because high-tech industries are really risky. So about roughly 2/3 of all tech startups fail. So it was really risky for lenders in this area to fund these new tech businesses. However, when they do work out, they tend to make lots and lots of money. So Silicon Valley is a good case study when we're studying how capital or financial loans and investment could specify where industries would locate. Also, I wanted to mention that in LDCs, a lot of industries are less likely to get funding due to unstable political environments, a high level of debt in the country, or bad economies. So this is kind of a huge problem for LDCs that are trying to build up their economy and develop further. So they're only likely to get loans through the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, those structural adjustment loans that we talked about previously. Or you might see multinational corporations, so corporations that are headquartered in maybe an MDC, and then production facilities are made in LDCs that can kind of help LDCs industrialize. Okay, so the last site factor is land. So historically, these pictures that you're looking at are old factories, and these factories were typically located in cities, and this is because they were close to large markets and large labor pools. However, as you can see, these factories were composed of different stories, and that is not efficient. It costs a lot of money to build in an urban environment, and it's also not safe. So today we actually see factories spread out in one-story buildings, and they are typically outside of a city due to easy access to transportation routes. Also, it's less expensive to buy land in suburban and rural locations today than it is in the city center. So factories can spread out more, be safer, and spend less money on the land that they're buying. So now we're going to switch to talking about situation factors. And this involves transporting materials to and from a factory. So it's not the cost associated with running the factory itself, the land, labor, and capital. It's the costs that are involved in transporting materials to and from a factory. And so we're going to focus on Weber's least cost theory. So Weber's model of industrial location emphasizes the owner's desire to minimize transportation and labor costs and maximize agglomeration economies. And that's kind of a big statement. But let's start off by saying this. Weber argued that owners are going to locate their factories where these three costs could be minimized. So first is transportation. Okay, so there are 4 modes of transportation, which we talked about: truck, train, ship, and airplane. And this transportation would include getting raw materials to the actual factory and then taking the finished product to the market, right? And costs rise each time inputs or products are transferred from one mode to another. So you want to try to minimize your transportation costs, which we're going to focus on here in a minute. But the other 2 things that Weber considered were labor and agglomeration. So labor, kind of like what we just talked about, if it's cheap enough, companies can afford to pay high transportation costs over long distances. And this is what typically leads to outsourcing. And then lastly, agglomeration. So agglomeration is businesses that are clustered together to share talent, resources, facilities, and there are some positives and negatives to agglomeration. First of all, you can share kind of these labor pools, these services, and that's a positive situation. However, a negative situation is that it could lead to too much competition and can also lead to high rents and high wages, which is bad for industry. So examples of agglomeration could be like fashion in Milan, Italy, and Paris, or think about Hollywood, right? That is the home to motion pictures. Another example could be Nashville, where we see country music originate from most times. And then lastly, you can think about Wall Street. So this is the financial sector of the United States. So again, let's talk about Weber, okay? He thinks about 3 things, right? He thinks about transportation costs, labor costs, and agglomeration, right? And his goal is that he wants to explain where industries are located based off of these 3 things, and he argues that these industries are going to be located where those costs are minimized. So let's get in depth a little bit on the locations of these facilities. So the break of bulk point is one place in which a factory could be located. So when mixed modes of delivery, so think about if raw materials are coming in through ships and are being unloaded here at the factories, and then the product is being made and then being shipped out on trucks to the markets, right? That's what a break of bulk point is where we see kind of two forms of delivery, two or more forms of delivery happen. And the break of bulk is where this is actually transferred, right? So where the materials are transferred from the ship and then made and put onto the truck. So we see some factories locate where these transportation networks intersect. It makes sense because, as I said previously, costs rise each time inputs or products are transferred from one transportation mode to another. So workers must unload from one mode and reload to another, and it makes sense that the factory would be at one of those unloading and reloading spots instead of adding a third situation into the equation and causing more transportation costs. Okay, the next thing that Weber mentioned was bulk reducing industries. So a bulk reducing industry is an industry in which the input weighs more than the final product. So to minimize transportation, you want to locate the industry near the source of inputs. Okay, and so let's talk through that. Okay, so the final product weighs less than its raw materials. So if you look at this chart right here, right, let's say one raw material is located here and another raw material is located here. Okay, if both of these raw materials are heavier than the final product, then the production facility or the factory is going to be located near the raw materials, not near the market. Okay, so an example of that would be like a paper mill, right? The raw materials are forests. So huge pieces of timber, gigantic logs are traveling short distances to a production facility. They are then refined and made into paper, which is much lighter, right? It is weight reducing. So transportation costs are less to then travel that paper to the market. Bulk gaining industries are next. This is an industry in which the product gains some type of volume or weight during production. And so we see these industries located near the markets where the product is sold. So one example of a bulk gaining industry is soda bottling. Okay, so let's say that your raw materials, let's say water and corn syrup, are located in these places, right? It is easier to ship those materials to the production facility to then be filled in plastic or glass bottles and actually gain weight and then travel a short distance to the market. Another way that you can think about this too is car production, right? We see small parts, let's say brakes are made here and tires are made here, right? These are small parts of a whole, and it is easier to deliver these parts to a final production facility and then put it together into a car than it is to locate the small parts down here in the production industry here and have to ship finished cars very far to the market. So product needs to be assembled close to the market to cut transportation. Something else to think about too is perishable products, right? These companies must be located near the market as well, their production facilities, to assure freshness. So things like milk bottling and bakeries. We're not going to talk about Hotelling's model. We'll talk about that in class, folks. So here is the last slide that I need you to look at. answer the question, and we are done.